Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross. Jim, how are you, man?
I'm good, Conrad. Good. I'm happy. I'm healthy. I'm enjoying my life in AEW a great deal. Things are good. So, and this should be a most interesting show. I think you termed it perfectly before we started recording that this could be one of our better sleeper shows.
Yes, sir.
Because I was when he first told me we were going to do a Terry Taylor show, I thought to myself, well, goddamn, that's about as stimulating as oatmeal with nothing on it. But I'm willing to play along with Conrad. He's the booker. And so, I do what the booker tells me. So it should be an interesting show. There's a lot to unpack here, Conrad.
Yes, there is.
There's a lot to unpack here. So there you go. And your buddies there in Birmingham did a great job on an interview I did with them here a while back. I wanted to thank Cole and
McElroy.
McElroy. They did a nice job. They were prepared. They were respectful. They didn't look down at me because I was a wrestling carny, wrestling person. We talked OU football and OU going to the SEC. So I told those guys, I said, you guys, I heard it when coming on the air when you introduced me. It's the Texas OU coming to the SEC. I said, why is it always Texas and OU?
Right.
I said, Texas hasn't won a game since won a conference title since Conrad weighed 205. Got all turned around here, fellas. But anyway, they were good. And this Oklahoma to SEC dialogue is everlasting. People are talking about it more and more every day. And I'm just looking forward to when they release a schedule at some point in time. I don't know how you can get divorced from somebody, and I know about divorce. I don't know how you have a divorce and continue to live with their person.
Yeah.
For another 3 years. So it's going to be, OU will be the definitive heels on the road. They'll help sell more tickets. People will pay money just like they would a great wrestling heel, a wrestling villain, to see them get their ass beat when they come to their campus. I said, so they'll keep the emotion and all that into the equation, but it should be fun to see how it all continues to evolve and how the schedule works out. Because that's what I'm most concerned about. Not concerned. I'm interested in finding out how the league's going to be divvied up.
Yep.
And who's going to play who when, and if there's a cube or this is our pod and whatever. I don't know how they're going to do it. There's a way of doing it, obviously.
Yeah. Yes.
And so we'll see how it works out. But it's going to create a lot of great home attractions, I think, for fans to invest in, and it should be a lot of fun. But anyway, those guys are big fans of yours and big fans of the your podcast network and the ad-free network, all that good stuff. So they represented Alabama very well, and from what you tell me, they're the big ratings guys around.
Oh yeah, man. Clearly the biggest sports talk radio show in the whole state. And I know they appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate that we're going to get to see even more of what you guys have been doing with AEW, because as you and I are dropping this episode, everybody's hearing it. Tomorrow night is the very first Rampage. Of course, last night was Dynamite in Pittsburgh, but tomorrow night it's Rampage in Pittsburgh. It's a live program, man. This is, it's going to be fun. I mean, not just the first AEW show, but the second AEW show on a weekly basis. Tickets have just gone bananas in Chicago, and now tomorrow night, Pittsburgh. Here we go.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's good. Our brand, the AEW brand, has probably grown more and gained more notoriety in the last month than perhaps it has since the inception, since the launch. The ticket sales, like you mentioned, in Chicago, New York, these major markets where people can make decisions on doing a lot of different things, is there. We're doing well. So ticket sales are great. And Pittsburgh is good. And golly, the Arthur Ashe Stadium is looking phenomenal. Chicago's events are going to be big time with some major attractions and all that good stuff. So I'm very excited about this, but again, as the old timer has, it's got one little negative. You still got to go through the TSA line. You still got to get on an airplane and endure, because the flights are packed.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if you're thinking about jumping on an airplane and it being very wide open, it was that way a few months ago because I was on those planes. Hardly anybody on them. Now there's hardly ever an empty seat. So it's just one of those major deals you deal with. But nonetheless, I'm excited about all these upcoming events, and you know, the potential for some dream matches and some powerhouse cards exist for real. And I think that's going to be great. Our roster gets stronger. That's kind of what we're looking for. So all good, buddy. All good. Life is good. And I'm happy about the little things, like a seasoning being back in stock.
There you go. JRsBBQ.com. In case you've missed it, go pick it up. Now it's available in 2 sizes, same size you've been getting it, but now you got the whole family size deal. And before we clicked record today, you were telling me that this stuff's flying off the shelves faster than ever right now.
Yeah, we've ordered a ton, and it's selling like crazy. It really is. That's not just hyperbole, you know, to the point to where I'm encouraging my people in Oklahoma to get that second order put in. Let's go. We're not going to run out of nothing ever again if we keep from it.
Right.
And that's why we changed manufacturers of the seasoning, and with the same company that's going to make the JR's Red Ass hot sauce. So the seasoning is done. We're going to make sure we don't run out. It's selling like crazy. It tastes great. Still very universally utilized if you choose to. And then, of course, the hot sauce will be out in a few weeks. And I think that's going to take off as well, because people have been asking about the hot sauce. Well, I got the first test model. It's in my refrigerator right now here in Jacksonville. And man, it's pretty damn good. I'm just going to tell you, people go try it for themselves and they'll say it's this, that. I don't think they're going to say it's not hot enough.
Right.
Because Red Ass JR's hot sauce is just that, hot, and it's flavorful. So it leaves that nice little aftertaste that you always look for, and those kind of things. So it's a very fun time. I'm having a blast, good time. So, and then there's Terry Taylor.
He is our subject today. We're so excited to be talking about Terry Taylor. Next week, we're going to be talking about all things SummerSlam 1996. In 2 weeks, we'll talk about the SmackDown series debut. I guess technically that's the second episode. The first episode was a bit of a pilot, but let's jump into why we're here. Terry Taylor, and believe it or not, Jim, this is actually one of our more requested episodes. I think maybe because you guys spent some time together working with the Cowboy and working with Vince and working in WCW. You guys have been everywhere together, really.
Yeah, we have. First time I met Terry was in Mid-South. I think Eddie Graham sent Terry to Cowboy. And, you know, he was the prototypical baby face of the 80s. He had the look, he had the body type, he had the skill set, handsome guy. And so he was the perfect fit to be a baby face. And that's what we needed at that point in time. So he came in with high expectations and he checked all the boxes to be a great baby face in a wrestling territory.
Let's start at the beginning. Paul Warden Taylor III was born on March 12th, 1955 in Greenville, South Carolina. He makes his in-ring wrestling debut in 79 for Championship Wrestling from Florida. And right off the bat, he's working with names like Bugsy McGraw, Terry Funk, and Bill Irwin. We're going to talk about when he came to work for the Cowboy in a little bit. But first, when did you first hear of Terry Taylor? Is it through the game of Wrestler Telephone? Is it through one of the old magazines?
Magazines primarily. The Wrestling Telephone was active then, Wrestler's Telephone, but I wasn't a big participant of it. That was before the internet, before all these wrestling, sites were up and at it and developing and growing. So I think probably the magazines, because Terry was very photogenic. He had a good look, and when you get the pretty baby face all bloody, it's kind of a dramatic presentation. So I think the magazines are the first time that I was made aware of this young baby face from Florida. And then all of a sudden, Cowboy has a phone conversation with Eddie Graham, and Eddie is high on Terry. So that's how we got him.
Let's mention that he's working in Florida before moving on to GCW, where he's going to win the vacated NWA national television title, defeating both Ken Patera and Bob Armstrong in a bit of a round robin tournament. He's going to hold it for 51 days before dropping it to Terry Funk. And for him to really come out of the gate so quickly with a big push like this, promoters in that era saw money in this guy right away. Did they not?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Like I said earlier, he checked all the boxes. If you're looking to cast, i.e. book a baby face, he would have been one of your top guys, because he could sell, he could wrestle, he had the look. Wasn't a bad promo, wasn't great, but wasn't a bad promo. And as every wrestling promoter will tell you, in that era, can't say that for today, but in that era, having baby faces that were very social, making the female fans happy and investing their time with these ladies, was what they were looking for. And we had the Rock and Roll Express, and we had Terry Taylor, and we had Magnum TA. So Cowboy was doing a pretty good job of casting, of booking talents that would appeal to the female fan base. And look, they bought shirts, they bought tickets, they traveled, because it was a territory. So they knew every night what town the talents were going to be in, and a lot of those ladies would travel. So Terry was marked for greatness early. And if you get Eddie Graham's endorsement, you don't need a whole lot more. Just don't go out there and fall on your face. And he never really did that. Terry became his own worst enemy at times, which we'll talk about, because he couldn't control his verbal. He always had an issue.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that.
The rumor and innuendo is he was originally supposed to be part of the Fabulous Ones. I think most folks in that area just refer to it as the Fabs. Of course, that's going to be Stan Lane, but Steve Kern winded up getting the spot. Did you ever hear the story that Terry Taylor could have been one of the Fabs?
Well, I did not, but it makes sense. He would have fit in that group very well. He would have fit there with Stan. Two blonde guys, good looking guys, basic same body types, good sellers, fire, all the babyface cliches you could think of. I never heard the story specifically, but I can see how it could be very true.
I want to mention too, he eventually starts teaming up with Bobby Fulton to form the Fantastic Ones. They split up, and then Fulton would join up with Tommy Rogers to form the Fantastics. Boy, these are some legendary tag teams in this era that he was a part of, or almost a part of.
Yeah. The issue there was he wasn't a part of them that long to develop some sort of legacy or awareness. But you're right. Everybody saw something in Terry. That's why these promoters and these bookers are giving him the chance, whether it be in a tag team environment or wherever. Cowboy never believed that Terry we didn't need another babyface tag team. We had the Rock and Roll Express, arguably the best babyface tag team in the world at that time. So, but Terry was on everybody's hit list. It's like, what's wrong with this dude? Well, why is he getting booked? And some of those things I mentioned just casually, but Terry could be his own worst enemy at times. But that's no different than any other entertainer or any other high level athlete. They have their little ticadillos that you got to deal with, but Terry was destined for greatness early on. That's what he was. He was anointed to be a Jack Briscoe like babyface, somebody that could probably be an NWA champion at some point in time in his career if it had worked out that way.
Let's talk about the territories here. He's going to start to bounce around St. Louis, Kansas City, and then over to Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, where he's going to take the junior heavyweight title with Les Thornton. Tell the some of our younger listeners who may not be familiar with the name, who Les Thornton was back then and what he's up to in more recent years.
Well, I don't know what he's up to in more recent years, but Les was a Brit and had a lot of that British style, the counters, the reversals, the escapes, and all those things, and was a solid hand. He was a solid hand and reliable guy. That's why he got booked everywhere. He was reliable and he could work with anybody. So, but the junior heavyweight, at that time, the junior heavyweights had credence because all those junior heavyweight guys that were NWA affiliated to some degree were still following the legend of Danny Hodge. And Hodge still had built up a great reputation as a very talented junior heavyweight. Now, if you're less than everybody else, you can't be the junior heavyweights, all those things. Like AEW doesn't have a junior heavyweight title. I'm not advocating it either. Too many titles really spoils the soup to me. You don't need that many. And I heard somebody say that they hoped AEW had a 6-man tag title. And I wouldn't be against it, but it would be something I'd be breaking my door down and running up and down the halls here and saying, guess what? We have a junior heavyweight title. But then it was looked at a lot differently. And so I know in later years, talents like Sean Waltman always looked at that distinction of being a junior heavyweight or a cruiserweight or whatever name you want to call it as a negative. And to some degree, he was absolutely right.
Well, eventually Terry's going to find his way to Mid-South Wrestling. Do you remember how Terry came in? Would he have been somebody sending in 8x10s, or do you think you or Bill or somebody would have made a call trying to inquire about his availability?
No, I think it's an Eddie Graham deal.
Okay.
I think Terry was just bouncing around trying to find his voice, so to speak, his identity. He wasn't making any money in some of those territories. He sure as hell wasn't making any money in Kansas City. So I'm sure he relied back on his old mentor and said, can you help me get booked someplace where I can actually earn a living? And so I think that's where the entry into Mid-South came. But I know that Eddie Graham was very influential in Cowboy hiring Terry Taylor. So, and it worked out the best for everybody, quite frankly, over the long haul.
What was your first impression meeting Terry in real life?
Very confident, somewhat arrogant, unique in that way. He was smarter than most people, high IQ, but you could tell that there was just something maybe missing there, maybe genuality. I'm not sure, but he had been in the wrestling business long enough to learn how to work the program and who to say the right things to and things of that nature, which everybody has to learn. It's not a Terry Taylor issue by any stretch. Some of these guys today are still learning it, how to coexist with the office, so to speak. But I think, but Cowboy, when he saw his videos, he knew he could do something with him. We needed some good looking baby faces. And that was just Cowboy's old school mythology. We needed good looking baby faces. And like I mentioned earlier, when you got Magnum TA and you got Terry Taylor and you got the Rock and Roll Express, you're covering your bases pretty good there with the female appealing audience. And Terry fit right in there, quite frankly, maybe better than any of them.
So he's going to debut January 4th, 1984, and he defeats Doug Vines. He's immediately put into a program against Crusher Darso and Nikolai Volkov, and he's going to be teaming up within a month with Junkyard Dog in a tag team match against these guys. Boy, you're teaming with the dog about a month in, Cowboys got big plans for you, huh?
Yeah. Cowboy saw something special in Terry and thought he was going to be able to fill a big void for us. And for the longest time he did, quite frankly. But yeah, if Cowboy's putting you with his bell cow, JYD, then you are right. Hit the nail on the head. There's something there. There's a reason for that booking. And Cowboy was just going to make sure that Terry was getting the right rub and the right exposure. You know, you got two anti-American like heels, big guys, 300-pounders, and Darso and Nikolai. And of course, your main man was JYD. So putting Terry Taylor there to do a good job of selling and setting the table and then giving the hot tag to JYD was just good math.
I'm curious, when you said he was checking a lot of the boxes, what exactly was Cowboy looking for in a babyface back then? You know, as far as not just an on-screen character, but the guy behind the scenes. So the intangibles. You've talked a lot on this show about being reliable, et cetera, et cetera. What was Cowboy impressed with that Terry knew when he came in?
Well, Terry was a good worker, fundamentally sound, understood the psychology of wrestling, had good teachers. He had wrestled as, you know, you talked about earlier, some of these, you know, when you're young in the business and you're going to wrestle with Terry Funk and some of those guys, you're giving a great education. And so now does the wrestler that's getting the education take advantage of such, or does he look at it just as another night at the office and another match? I don't think Terry actually ever did that. He learned from all these guys. And so Cowboy liked the look. He liked his resume. He liked how he was taught. And he was young, had youth going on his side. I'm not exactly sure how old Terry was when he first came to work at MidSouth, but he's a younger guy. So there was a lot of things there that checked the boxes. You know, Cowboy didn't know about Terry, anything about Terry away from the ring or whatever. But I know that it seemed like Cowboy's ex-wife, Anna, was really high on Terry Taylor, her and her girlfriends. And so there was good market research.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. And so they thought he was sexy and handsome and you know, a star. He felt like a star to them. So I think all those things contributed to Cowboy's comfort level of bringing Terry in and not messing around. You know, he got that one win over Doug Vines, who was really a good enhancement guy, but you can't make a living getting over on guys like Doug Vines. You got to get in the fast lane and see how you run and how you proceed in the fast lane against guys that are considered main event talents. And there was no bigger main event talent in that era than JYD.
It's a different era for promoting wrestling. I mean, it's all about, especially in this era here, selling tickets, live events. And one of the ways you do that is you try to appeal to as many people as you can. And back then, you had quite a few ladies showing up to the show. So you needed those good looking baby faces to draw the ladies in and get them to buy tickets. Right.
Yeah, exactly. You play your entire audience. And the thing about it is that, like a lot of old stagio promoters and office people, you know, they always discounted women. And I don't know if that's just a chauvinistic way they were raised, or they thought that it was their rite of passage to, you know, for example, when Moolah would bring her girls in to get booked, and that happened more often than not when McGurk was primarily in charge, because just the old school thing of that Lillian Ellison, aka the Fabulous Moolah, have been coming into those territories for generations. I think that you know, the women, when they come to town and get booked, they always had heat on them by the other talents. Reason being is that, you know, you're going to have a certain size card, a certain number of bodies. So when the 4 women came in to do their tag match around the territory, that meant that 4 of the boys were not getting booked. And if they weren't getting booked, Conrad, they weren't earning any money. And so then the women come in and have this heat. And that's why they would dress in closets and bathroom stalls and all that kind of thing. So, hey, I heard a funny story about a Ruth Chris Steakhouse bathroom thing. Well, I'll get into that later. Sorry, not kidding. I'm kidding, Conrad. It's a joke. But that Cole talks big. You're very Cole.
He does.
He knows where all the dirt is.
He does.
Yeah.
He does.
So anyway,
moving on, Taylor's working with Butch Reed, teaming up with Magnum TA. And then he's going to enter MidSouth Tournament to crown the first television champion, where he's going to go to the finals before losing to Darso. Man, he's the white meat baby face. He's over with the crowd, but that damn Darso got the best of him. And when you hear some of these talents, you know, Junkyard Dog, Darso, Volkov, Butch Reed, Magnum TA, man, this is a loaded roster here, especially for the era, right?
Yeah. Cowboy had a great eye for talent. I like to think I learned a lot about evaluating talent, scouting talent, so forth, from him. But this whole roster, you know, we can go down up and down the roster. You know, Crusher Darso had great runs as Crusher Khrushchev, Repo Man, and other characterizations, and had a nice run in WWE. Had a nice run in the Mid Atlantic. And Barry Darso is one of the classiest guys that I ever worked with in the business. A good dude. And I saw some pictures just a week or so ago where he was, I think, in Charlotte at the fan thing with Bill Eadie.
Yep.
Of course, they were Demolition. So Darso was a star.
Yeah.
Cowboy loved that big physical nature that he brought, realism. But you know, you look at all these other guys. You know, Dr. Death was there. This is so many different cats. Nikolai Volkov still had some gas in his tank at that point in time, and was a very, very good heel. So we had a good roster. We really did. And the hiring of Taylor and those other guys we've mentioned just made it even better. And it set us up for this wonderful run that we got on in Mid-South. Was pretty damn impressive as far as a small territory drawing the numbers that we drew. And all that was because we had great weekly television that was produced in a way that to finish a story, you got to go to your local arena. It wasn't a TV show then like it is basically now, and where that was the primary carrier. It was a situation where it was TV show set up. It was like an infomercial, and it set up an opportunity to buy tickets to see something that you could be emotionally invested in.
He eventually captures that TV title and would defend it against Dr. Death, Steve Williams, a lot. Of course, Dr. Death is one of your longtime great friends, and I'm sure you guys were big buds even back then. What did you think of his matches with Terry Taylor?
Well, Terry did a good job of leading Doc along. And I don't know if it was just out of respect or fear. But Terry was good at leading the match, helping Doc slow down, and just be solid where you don't see through their stuff. But I thought they had nice chemistry because Doc was willing to listen to a guy that Doc knew he could beat in a real shoot in a minute or so. But he could do that to a lot of guys. But anyway, yeah, they had some solid matches, but they liked each other. You know, you find out from a guy like Taylor, who's not a shooter, he's a worker, that the best thing you can do when you're paired up with a guy like Doc is get them on your side, so they trust you. So when you're leading them along, the one that's being led, it knows that this is somebody's not just trying to take advantage of him. And Doc could see that in Terry. Terry was smart enough to make that work. And I thought they had good chemistry. They really did.
Terry Taylor would wind up dropping the title to Adrian Street in Shreveport, Louisiana in September of 1984. And later on would send Adrian out of the territory in a loser leaves town match. Some of our younger listeners might not be familiar with his work, but I actually saw Adrian Street in Continental down in Montgomery TV when I was a kid. Boy, talk about a different presentation, especially for the era. What do you think of Adrian Street?
Adrian is a hell of a guy. Still alive, probably in his 80s. Known as one of the toughest men ever in wrestling. You know, came from the coal mines, Great Britain. He was a coal miner. Dad was a coal miner. He was a shooter, legit shooter, but he had this gimmick where he was, I guess it's for today's audience, he would be kind of a cross between a Michael Jackson, Freddie Mercury, flamboyant, apparently gay wrestler. And he had a 6-foot valet who was his wife, Miss Linda. But Adrian Street had all the stuff that like a guy like Steven Regal would have, all those little counters and reversals and things of that nature. And he was just a fabulously unique performer. But you know, the worst thing that happens is a fan would think as you're leaving the arena or arriving that this guy's not, he's playing for the other team. So I can probably whip his ass.
Nope.
Big mistake. So, but Adrian was interesting. Hey, I think Adrian may have been brought in by Bill Dundee, who was a booker there at a time and did a real good job. It's not fair that some people say, well, all Dundee did was rehash the Memphis angles. It didn't make a shit what he rehashed, or if that is even true. But Dundee had a lot of respect for Adrian. He had to sell Cowboy on it because Cowboy was not big on promoting the quote unquote gay lifestyle. I'm sure Cowboy has probably eased off that stance at this stage of his life. So, but Dundee sold him on it, and Adrian, he was so much fun to interview because he kind of hit on you. So here's young JR getting hit on by this short 5'8", thick, tattooed, tough guy. And if you didn't know he was a tough guy, you sure as hell wouldn't guess it. It's out of the box. So I think Dundee had a big part of that. And we got a nice little run out of Adrian in that deal. And I remember, I'm pretty sure the way that Adrian won the TV title is that he had Taylor back to the ropes, and the referee steps in, breaking on the left because they're both right-handed, and he says break, and Taylor backs up a step, and Adrian grabs him by the face and kisses him right on the lips. And Taylor's so much in shock that he went down. Adrian may have grabbed some tights or something, but Adrian won the title in that manner, a kiss. And I remember talking to Cowboy. He said, "Do you think we screwed up that deal?" "No, I don't know. I don't think so." He said, "I didn't want to really go that far with it." I said, "Well, it's that cat's out of the bag now, buddy."
Yeah, it is.
But I liked Adrian. He was a colorful character. Anybody that's got access to streaming YouTube or whatever, check him out, because you're going to be really impressed by what he could do as a wrestler, specifically a heel. And all that was based on was homophobia. Simple as that. Homophobic people were afraid of Adrian. They didn't, well, I don't want him to touch me. Or, maybe the gayness will rub off on me. I'll become gay. Maybe it's hereditary. maybe it's like getting the flu. So crazy shit. But Adrian was interesting. I liked Adrian. I think he lives down in the Pensacola area.
Taylor eventually regains the TV title from the champion Nature Boy Buddy Landell, and they have a string of matches. What'd you think of Taylor and Landell in the ring together?
They had real good chemistry. They both were looking for a break. They both were looking to show off their skills. Buddy had a uphill climb because, he's got that Nature Boy name. I never did understand why he did that. I thought it kind of marked him a little bit, because he was a poor imitation of the original. Original in this generation would be Ric Flair. The original in a previous generation would be Buddy Rogers.
Right.
So, but Buddy Landell took that Nature Boy thing to heart, and he was an underrated worker. If Buddy was more reliable and wasn't so attached at that time to drugs and alcohol, he could have been a whole lot better. He never got to live his full potential, in my view. But when he had matches with Taylor, they had good chemistry. They had really good, solid matches. And it was really like a philosophy 101. You had the chicken shit heel who had to cheat to gain an unfair advantage. And you had the baby face who could out wrestle the bad guy until the bad guy cheated to gain that advantage. So it's classic philosophy.
Let's also mention that he being Terry Taylor, pronouns pal.
Thank you, pal.
Is going to send Buddy Landell packing out of MidSouth as well. Of course, we know Landell's going to have quite an interesting run with Jim Crockett Promotions. Eventually, Taylor gets the win over Ted DiBiase, who was the North American champion in a title versus title match. And this is a big push as the North American title is sort of the equivalent of the WWF's world title at the time. And what a title it was. I've heard the rumor and innuendo is the AEW belt was loosely inspired by this monstrosity that was the North American belt. If you don't know what we're talking about, throw it in your Google machine, but it was quite the spectacle, was it not?
Yeah. It was very ornate, shall we say. But no, Terry Taylor could never look back on his time in Mid-South and say, I wasn't used correctly. He was given every opportunity to get over. He was booked with guys that were top hands. I mean, in that era, you couldn't get any better working with somebody more than Ted DiBiase, let's say. And he was getting a lot of real good experience working with top guys to go along with the guys he had previously worked with and had learned from. So, yeah, Terry got a great push from Cowboy. And Cowboy saw something in him, and there was something there, quite frankly. So it was an interesting time. And Terry Taylor was, and I'll say this about Terry, his matches are always very solid. He can adapt to the style and the strengths of his opponent, which is very key. Be unselfish in utilizing those skills. And so your obligation is to make your opponent look better than he actually is. And I thought that was I just never saw him have a bad match in that regard. But he was working with great guys, and and Cowboy was a hell of a motivator. And so and Terry had a great ego. So he was not going to go out there and not be the best match on the card if he could keep from it. So it was a really interesting time there. And again, as you'll see, as we continue on, he had great opportunities to work with the best in the world.
Let's talk about the best in the world. It's a 1 week stretch between April 28th and May 3rd. And Terry Taylor is going to be working the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Ric Flair, the other Nature Boy. They're going to have 4 at least 30-minute matches between Mid-South and Houston Wrestling. Did you see any of these matches? What do you remember about those?
Yeah. So I called the match in New Orleans at the Superdome. That was a good match.
Terry has a great story about that, I think, where it's the biggest match of his life. You know, he's sort of one of the top guys in Mid-South, and the touring NWA champion is coming to town. It's a Superdome show.
All right.
And well, Rick does what Rick did back then and naged all night long. So shows up to the building late and looking kind of haggard. And he takes a nap in the back. And of course, Terry is very nervous. This is the biggest moment, biggest match of his life. And who am I wrestling? This guy's not in condition to perform. And eventually Rick wakes up, has some coffee.
I guess who got him the coffee? Terry Taylor.
You? Okay.
No, he sent Taylor after his coffee.
Tremendous.
You talk about humbling somebody. They didn't sit and talk about their match. And, you know, like you'll see a lot of the talents today do. He said, "Hey kid, get me a coffee." I don't know that Rick was so foggy that he might not even know who he's working with that night, because it didn't matter.
Yeah.
They're going to work his match anyway. And he knew what he was doing, and there was nobody better then or now, at least in my view, and I'm very biased. So he sent Terry after the coffee, and I don't know if they have much more of a conversation than cream and sugar, or they didn't. I don't think they talked about how they're going to get into the match. They knew the finish, and they knew, and the time was up to Rick. And I think, and like I said, they went about 40 minutes. Looked like it was going to go a Broadway, a draw. Didn't happen. But young Terry Taylor wrestling in one of his idols in the Superdome, the biggest venue in our territory.
Yeah.
One of the biggest nights of the entire year. He's wanting all this download, all this information, and how can we make this match extraordinarily special? And he didn't get that. I'll see you out there, kid. And so they went home when Rick wanted to go home, and they told a great story. And I vividly remember calling that match. And I think I called it twice. I think I called it there. And then I called an edited version of it later on. It's probably on one of those one of those MidSouth DVDs or something. So yeah, I was all about that. And it was such a fundamental match. It wasn't overthought. It was logical, and it may in today's marketplace, Conrad, it would probably be perceived as being very not mundane, routine, and so there was no Hurricane Ranas and no Tope El Suicidas. There was none of that fancy shit. They wrestled, and they worked in and out of body parts, and it was easy for anybody, grandma or grandson, to follow along. So it was an interesting night, to say the least. And I'm sure that there's nobody in the building more relieved than Terry Taylor after that match ended. They got through it, and it was good.
What a fun story. What a fun night for his career. The Nightmare would ultimately defeat Terry Taylor for the North American title, and Taylor finds himself back in Mid-Atlantic again. Why was Terry leaving the promotion here and moving over to Jim Crockett?
Well, this time, when you run a weekly territory, you have to book it a little bit differently than like say AEW is on every Wednesday night. We're a TV show, and we're not doing live events right now. I assume at some point in time that'll occur. Don't know, but I assume that's assumption. So it was just time to move on. Cowboy liked to keep things fresh. As we had documented, Terry had won titles, had worked with top guys. I remember he had some matches with Ernie Ladd. He had a lot of matches with top guys, and so Cowboy apparently thought it was time to move on. And it also, I'm sure, it was under the fact that Crockett may have wanted Terry to come in. That territory is pretty hot. So he's leaving one territory that's pretty hot to one that's very hot. So there's more money there. And, he may have been, that Bill felt like he owed Dusty. That's funny. We talk about these things now as a matter of factly that the promotions worked with each other.
Right.
And, I don't consider Impact Wrestling working with AEW the same level. It's just not. Crockett's promotion was great, and they were doing wonderful business. They were big, national TV, TBS, all that good stuff. And I think Terry was jonesing to get back in that national scene because we were a local territory. We didn't have a national overlay. We did for a few weeks, and it did well on TBS on Sunday nights. But by and large, it didn't have that national presence. And that's what a lot of young guys wanted. He wanted to build his brand. So I think it was just time. But I don't remember there ever being any animosity. It was discussed. Terry knew what his schedule was. He knew what they were looking at doing. And he was excited about going to Mid-Atlantic and jumping on that train. It was moving pretty fast.
Let's mention that he's going to defeat Black Bart for the NWA national title and hold it until Starcade 85, when his old foe Buddy Landell would defeat him for it. It feels as if Terry Taylor is poised for a bigger run here. Did you believe at this point Terry Taylor was eventually going to become the NWA world champion? Did you see that in him, or not so much?
I saw that possibility being real. Terry's personality and his perceived arrogance in the eyes of decision makers never did him any favors. He's a smart guy and didn't mind letting you know how smart he was. And he could be a little bit of a dressing room lawyer. So for old school guys, Cowboy tolerated that a lot because Terry was drawing money and all that good stuff. So, but I think that I think that at one time he always had the skill set to do it. But I don't know how seriously he was taken. He wasn't in good political stead with a lot of offices because of his perceived arrogant attitude. And some old school guys like a Dusty Rhodes or Cowboy Bill Watts, they didn't jive with them very well. So that's kind of how I look at that situation.
He's going to eventually come back to Mid-South, or should I say the UWF, after Starcade, and he becomes a television champion again, this time defeating Buzz Sawyer. You know, what's Cowboy think of Terry Taylor the second go around after he's come in? It feels like Cowboy really tried everything with him. He left, went and tried the whole Jim Crockett thing for whatever reason. That wasn't exactly what he was looking for. And now he's back. At that point, has a wrestler, not just Terry Taylor specifically, but when a guy leaves, tests his mettle somewhere else, and then comes back, do you think perhaps the promoter sees him a little differently? Maybe he perceives him as coming back with his tail between his legs or what have you?
I don't think so. I think it's if you use today's standards, Conrad, on that topic, then I can see where you're headed.
Yeah.
I can understand your point of view, and I'm not disagreeing with it. But in that era,
just
different deal, buddy. Different deal altogether. So, but Cowboy just saw that he thought he could reheat Terry up and get him back in a title pictures and main event picture. And Terry had learned a lot. Terry had improved his game, and I think Cowboy was looking for that to be maybe bigger than it was. I don't know. Our business model was soft at that point in time too. So that was kind of an issue.
Let's keep it moving here and talk about the next big program. We see Cowboy team with Terry Taylor to face off against the fabulous Freebirds at various live events. I'm sure you remember some of these matches. You talk about two totally different ways of life. Cowboy and the fabulous Freebirds. I think you've told the story before where he wanted to know if the Freebirds were on those marijuana pills. So this is a different era for sure.
Oh, a different culture.
Yeah.
Different society. It was a whole different ball game than we had become accustomed to. But obviously Cowboy's faith in Terry Taylor was proven right there in the booking. Cowboy and Terry Taylor were tag team partners, and Cowboy normally didn't book himself to lose too often. Not that he would, he did the Cornette and the Midnight Express. They just got some heat on him. But I think Terry Taylor it showed everybody that Terry Taylor was still well thought of by the boss, and off they would go. And again, this roster is, it always amazed me that we weren't doing better at UWF. It just never quite clicked. And I love the brand, and I know a lot of people love the brand. So, I don't know what all the issues were, but Terry came back and was pretty good. I think even to the point where Cowboy thought about Terry being like a booker.
Wow.
Because he had a real good Terry had a very good feel for the game, but he talked too much, and that was hard for some talents to deal with. And I think over time, Cowboy fell into that same deal. He's getting to be a little bit too high maintenance, and it's not the fact he can't work anymore. He can. It's just that sometimes what he says makes him his own worst enemy.
Let's also mention he's going to wind up dropping the TV title to Buddy Roberts in late September 86, and he's going to team with various guys in a feud with the Freebirds through the end of 86. And he starts 87 with a tag team with gentleman Chris Adams, and they win the UWF tag team titles over Hot Stuff and Hyatt International. Of course, that's Rick Steiner and Sting. Rick Steiner and Sting, Chris Adams, Terry Taylor, Eddie Gilbert, and Missy Hyatt on the outside. Boy, you guys have a loaded roster here in '87.
We got loaded. We reloaded. It was just a different mode of travel, Conrad. You know, where a company, it's an entirely different world than it is today. Entirely different world. You still have multiple places that you could go to actually make a living, and in many cases, a good living. It's a different ball game. There's fewer places that you can plant your flag and apply your trade than it used to be. And somebody's going to say, well, all these indie shows, look, there's not any wrestler in the world that's going to be honest with you that wouldn't love to be working for AEW or WWE. Maybe Impact, somewhere steady money, not this place or that place, and in these indiscriminate bookings. So we had a good roster. Again, it goes back to Cowboy. And a lot of guys wanted to come work for Bill because they had a chance to make big money. The territory was miserable travel because it's about 1,500, 2,000 miles a week in a car. We didn't do planes very often. And so, but Adams and Taylor, they should have been better than they were. I thought they would be better than they were. And I don't know if that was just a chemistry thing between the two of them. Somebody's got to share the spotlight with the other. You got to have a cohesive unit. And I don't know all the time that we got that out of there. Adams could be a little bit of a challenge to manage as his life ended kind of in a tragic way. But that's how Chris lived his life. And so I was never real high on Chris Adams, to be honest with you. Was he a good talent? Hell yeah, a good talent. But somebody that beats up women,
wow,
and things like that, I can't side with that. I can't handle it. So anyway, that's starting a subject we don't need to talk about. But anyway, the Adams and Taylor should have been one of the best tag teams ever, and they weren't.
The Chris Adams tag team is ultimately going to break up after Steiner and Sting defeat them for the tag titles. And then Taylor is injured in a car accident. He winds up having 6 inches of his small intestine and 4 inches of his large intestine and even his appendix removed. But he's back in the ring only 2 months later. Man, that's a tough son of a bitch right there. And I realize it's a different era. So if you're not working, you're not getting paid, but yeah, that's not a minor surgery.
No. You know, once upon a time in my life, I had 13 inches of my large intestine removed because of diverticulitis and diverticulosis and divertic everything. So that was the root cause of my being the subject of the go home skit on Raw, where Dr. Heine pulled my head out of my ass. And that was the same day I got out of intensive care. It was sent back home. Wasn't a fun homecoming, to be honest with you. So, yeah, he dodged a big bullet there, but you know, he is a tough guy and he needed the money. The money's motivating everybody. You know, when you're not paid big guaranteed monies, you know, you figure a way to get back in the lineup quicker than not. So Terry endured the pain and the discomfort. And that's where he got that. If you see any old pictures of him later on in his career in his wrestling gear, you'll see that great big scar. It's pretty prominent. So it was good it's good that he survived, obviously.
Of course.
But it's also good that he got another shot, got more bookings.
Terry's going to regain the TV title for the last time, beating Shane Douglas before ultimately the UWF is sold to Jim Crockett. Do you remember talking to Terry about what this was going to look like for his future, or just these two territories coming together? I mean, he was familiar with Jim Crockett Promotions and the way they ran their business and that cast of characters. And now he's going back, but it's not exactly his decision. The whole territory has been sold.
Yeah. That was a very stressful time. You know, Cowboy wanted to sell, and I was the bad guy that brokered the deal. And you know, a lot of the boys I had heat with a lot of the boys over that for many years because they couldn't see how we could do that. Well, we did it because the owner wanted to sell. He's going to sell to somebody. So what we wanted to try to keep these guys working and selling it to Crockett under the auspices that it was pitched was to have two separate brands and share time on TBS have a maybe 1 or 2 pay-per-views a year, just that UWF brand. And again, as I said, the key element was sharing time on TBS. That did not flush well with the incumbents that were already at JCP. You know, when they saw they were losing TV time to the UWF boys, by and large, that didn't go over well, because they looked at it's going to hurt them. It's all about them, and it wasn't about the big picture. They didn't stop to think about this is going to create new opponents, new matches, fresh talent. And you know, I said this on these interviews about the OU Texas thing. You know, it's new games, it's new campuses, it's new tailgating, it's new this and that. It's new opportunities more than anything. And a lot of these guys are and they're already in Crockett. They were so insecure that losing a 2 or 3 minute interview slot on TBS was like the kiss of death.
Right.
So it was, those guys came in with a little bit of heat, and that's unfortunate. I don't know that Jimmy had that opinion, but others did, seemed to me like. And some of them squirted through, got on the other side. You know, Sting had a great run in that whole world. The Steiners had a hell of a run, but by and large, a lot of those guys just were afterthoughts. And so guys that were previously on the cusp of being a main eventer in that territory were out of the picture. You're not going to be a main eventer here, because I can't unbook the guys that I've been working with and building. It's just not going to happen. And that was the kiss of death of that whole sell and the sales of the brand. And it would, you know, I've always felt like a great booker uses his roster head to toe. Everybody has a role. And I thought we had established that, but creative decisions changed, and it screwed up a lot of guys. So sometimes you got winners and losers in these transactions, and the losers were the guys that came along with the sale and then weren't used. It didn't make any sense to me.
Well, it didn't make sense to a lot of folks. Terry's going to show up defending the UWF TV title. He's going to be on various Jim Crockett TV shows, and then he's going to steal the NWA TV title from Nikita Koloff, and that eventually starts a feud, and then we're going to have a title unification. Starcade 87, we would see Nikita Koloff and Terry Taylor have an 18-minute and 20-second match that Meltzer said the first 10.5 minutes were so bad it quickly became the favorite for the worst match of the year. Meltzer would write, Taylor looked nervous walking to the ring, and it appeared that this was a match where neither would cooperate with each other. Nikita sold nothing and made Taylor look hopeless. I guess both realized how bad it was because they started to cooperate, and the last 8 minutes were really good. This is a different era in professional wrestling, but man, this thing was just oil and water here, was it not?
Yeah. And it's unfortunate and unnecessary.
Yeah.
There's no excuse for two athletes, the stature of Nikita and Taylor, to not have a good match, especially on a pay-per-view. And that's what happened. And a lot of that was, you know, Taylor knew that he was treading on thin ice. He knew that Nikita was one of Dusty's favorites. And when you're a favorite of the booker, all of a sudden, you know, the climate changes a little bit. But I remember that match. There's just no reason for it to suck. It did. And as Meltzer pointed out, which I agree with, in the latter stages of the match, it got to be decent. But there's no sense in having a bad 10 minutes head start, because you lose your audience. Taylor was on uncertain ground, on thin ice. He didn't know where his future was going to be. And I'm sure that Nikita, I'm relatively sure that Nikita was told to not give him too much. You know, and when the common sense would tell you, Terry Taylor was a star. He knew how to work, and you should make your opponent before you beat him. It's just logical. That's what you do. Oh, that's predictable. No, bullshit. That's fundamentally sound booking. And so, because if you're going to beat somebody, you want to beat somebody. And so, but Nikita was guzzling Taylor, no selling this. You know, everybody wanted to be the Road Warriors. You know, you get knocked down, you get up, stick your tongue out, do a trapezius shot and all that stuff. Same old shit, illogical. So, yeah, that was a bad night. Bad night at the office for Taylor and all of us, quite frankly, because that match had a little bit of buildup.
Yeah,
That match had a kind of had a feel. It felt like an interleague game or something, but it's remembered the wrong way.
Talk to me a little bit about, from your perspective, how the whole thing was handled with Jim Crockett and Bill Watts as far as the talent trade. Now that the talent's here, it feels like you've been through this twice. Once a generation later, Vince McMahon acquires a lot of WCW talent and the WWF talent essentially squashes them. And it feels like Dusty did it a generation before here. And I think Terry maybe saw the writing on the wall. And even though he's getting a win on TV on WTBS here, he's going to just jump ship to Memphis seemingly out of nowhere. And he's put over on television in a tag team match with Eddie Gilbert. Was he just phoning a friend to Eddie Gilbert, seeing if he could get a spot in Memphis? And hey, man, I don't like my creative. You've often said it comes down to cash and creative. Was Terry unhappy with the cash? Was he unhappy with the creative, or both?
Can't say about the cash. I'm sure he wanted to make more money.
Sure.
And they weren't on such big downside guarantees then that you didn't care if you were drawing money or whatever, because you're on salary and a handsome salary. I don't think that was the issue. I don't think the money. I think creative. Young guy, he didn't want to destroy the foundation of what he had built, and just to be jobbed out on television and lose every week, I even have matches where he would go over, but his opponent would not sell. It sucked. That's just ego and the wrong advice, I think, coming from the home office. And Terry had a good relationship with Eddie Gilbert. Eddie was going to be the booker of UWF when we sold, and that Eddie Gilbert was angry at me for many years about that, unfortunately, because that was his big opportunity to book a big territory. His dream job, to be the booker, and I think he would have been a great booker. But it's just not how it worked out, unfortunately. Politics is tough, man.
Yeah.
There's politics nowadays, immense politics, because of the immense salaries. Bray Wyatt gets cut. He's got to be making north of $1 million on a downside guarantee, and he's been sitting home. That's not good management.
Right.
And I'm not saying the guy should have been cut, but he should have been used if you're going to pay him that kind of cash. And how that happened is, I guess, probably a story for another day, because I don't know the details. I know that they got rid of a very talented kid, and I'm sure he won't have any issues finding work, speaking of Bray Wyatt. So anyway, Taylor leaving the Mid-Atlantic, I think he just got tired of being jerked around creatively. I mean, just a short story answer, creative discontent was bit Terry Taylor in the ass.
So he bounces from Memphis back to World Class, and he's working with Chris Adams again. And then he gets the big break that a lot of wrestlers were looking for in this era, a run with the World Wrestling Federation. He's going to sign with the WWF. He's placed with Bobby the Brain Heenan. So what could possibly go wrong? It's the Rooster. And as the famous story goes, I believe somewhere Terry Taylor did an interview that said that Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson and Bruce Pritchard and the like had essentially a box of gimmicks, and they had a character they wanted for Mr. Perfect, and they wanted a character they wanted for a Red Rooster, and a character they wanted for the $1 Million Man. And well, Terry just drew the short stick. Has Terry ever talked to you about his discontent with the Red Rooster character?
Yeah. And he wasn't crazy about the creative, but he was getting booked regularly. He's getting quality TV time, so he's rebuilding his legacy. But he wasn't crazy about it. You couldn't. Here's the thing: sometimes promoters give talents a gimmick, a persona, And upon further review, these personas are never going to draw. They're a complementary piece to an ensemble cast, and never at a main event, or I say never, rarely at a main event. That was kind of like Dusty and the Polka Dots.
Yeah.
It's hard to take that seriously, unfortunately. And the same thing here with the Red Rooster. You know, Terry got exposure. He got to work with some good guys. But the creative was just, it was bound to fail. It's just, you can't take advantage. I mean, maybe the kids might like it. I'm not so sure. I remember saying something to him one time on, where the hell were we? And I said to him, we're doing an interview or a commentary, and he was a heel. And I of course fired up on his ass. And I said, what are you going to do? Peck me to death?
Mm.
You can't get away from it.
Right.
He followed him around, and I didn't help the cause in that particular instance, but I thought it was a pretty good line at the time.
Tremendous.
Yeah. What are you going to do? Peck me to death if I don't stop? So anyhow, but here's the deal, man. He got a job. He's working for the biggest league in the game. He's getting a lot of TV time. And so he's got there's some good in this whole insanity, but not enough good to overcome the perception of being the Red Rooster.
Let's mention that in case you haven't seen the gimmick, again, according to the legend, he was in the running for Mr. Perfect, but he drew the short stick. He's going to eventually break up with Bobby Heenan. He's got his hair dyed in the middle and spiked up and cluck into the ring. And yeah.
Hideous.
Yeah.
It was hideous for a guy that was a really good worker who had really paid his dues, had great mentors. He's been booked by Eddie Graham. He'd been booked by Cowboy Bill Watts. He'd been booked by Dusty Rhodes and Jimmy Crockett. Great pedigree. And then now you get your break to go to the big league, and this is what you get. Not good.
Do you think Bruce Pritchard has defended this for years, saying that he could have gotten it over? I mean, Mark Calloway got a dead guy over. Dusty got polka dots over. He could have embraced it, but when a talent doesn't go all in and is sort of half committed, it's not going to work. And other people, I think Jim Cornette and the like, have said, nobody could have got the Red Rooster over. And
excuse me.
I think Bruce even suggests that, hey, nobody ever told him he had to cluck and scratch around. He was supposed to be the cock of the walk. And that was instead his, interpretation.
Yeah.
What say you? Do you think anybody could have gotten the Red Rooster over that persona, or was this just snake bit from day one?
Well, get it over meaning what? Is that you're saying get it over to where you could be a main event guy? That's what I'd always look at. Can he be a main event guy? I didn't think he could ever be a main event guy as in the personification of the Red Rooster. He's playing an angry chicken. I mean, fuck, come on. Bruce is going to say that, Conrad, because he was part of the brain trust that came up with some of those ideas. He's defending his post. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't agree with it.
Well, but also too, and I realize it's a different era. Some silly stuff has gotten over before, and floated to the top of the of the card.
I agree with that, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe which I don't have my ego's not so big that I can't admit when I'm wrong.
Right.
But I might be wrong on this deal. But I just didn't see a cocky chicken, cock of the walk. The cock walked all right. He walked right out of relevance, and
walked over to WCW in 1990.
Yeah. So it was. I didn't have confidence that the gimmick was going to get over. And again, I may be wrong, but I never saw that the Angry Rooster going to be a main event guy. I couldn't feel it.
Talk to me a little bit about 1990 when he does come over. to join WCW. I think if you're not on the booking committee, you're at least in a lot of those meetings. Was there a concern that, man, what do we do with this guy now that the audience thinks he's a chicken?
Well, you get rid of the chicken image as quickly as you can. And to do that, you got to plant good now.
Right.
You got to go to a place now that I can get, okay, I can get this. And wrestling fans are very forgiving by and large. They like new, they like fresh, they like something different. And the thing about Terry Taylor, look at the guys he's working with, Mean Mark Callis, aka The Undertaker. He's working with Arn Anderson over the TV title. So the confidence is still there that he can go out and work with anybody. But we had to get him distance as far as we could, as quickly as we could, from the Red Rooster. And I think we did a pretty decent job of that. But then subsequently, some of those characterizations is almost like a desperate effort to make Terry relevant again, when all he needed to do was go on TV and have some quality wins, get some time, match time, so that they would see how he worked, how he told a story. But when you got so many cooks in the kitchen, sometimes it does spoil the stew.
How was his reputation amongst the boys? I ask because once he starts his WCW run, he gets a DQ win over Mean Mark Callis, who we know is eventually going to become The Undertaker. He's even going to feud with Arn Anderson over the TV title. He has been a polarizing figure in wrestling. Was that already the case here in 1990 or not so much?
Yeah, he always had an opinion, and sometimes he didn't survey his audience well enough to keep some of those opinions to himself. They were said to elicit an emotion. I think what it told me is that he's been miscast. He was a great baby face in Mid-South and a great baby face in UWF, but his natural personality is that of a heel. He's arrogant. He's conceited. He knows he's a good-looking man. He's got a good body. He can work. And he would tell you all those things. But I think he's better suited to be a heel. And that's what we tried to get done at one point in time. But again, when you just still half-ass an angle, you just don't get over automatically, obviously. But I thought at that stage of his career and his life, he would have made a much better single heel than anything else.
Let's remind everybody that he even does some TV work. He's going to help host WCW Pro with Lance Russell. How would he have gotten this gig? Is this something he would have asked for, or were you involved in that? What can you tell us about how he started this?
I just think it was another way to distance him from the Rooster, let him be Terry. And he was a very good talker, understood the business, and he was the right guy. The great Lance Russell was able to help rehabilitate that image. So and Terry was a good talker, and he's a fresh face. So I think that made sense at that point in time. Anytime you can work with Lance Russell, if you want to improve your announcing skills, he's one of the guys you want to go to.
Right. Let's mention too that he's going to very quickly find himself doing some different stuff, including losing to Michael Wall Street, Starcade 90. That's his first pinfall loss. We covered this in our IRS episode recently. We also talked about him eventually becoming part of the York Foundation. Talk to me about what you felt about the pairing of Terry Taylor and Terry Runnels, who at the time was Alexandra York. I liked the look. I thought it was a cool concept. You know, in hindsight, maybe it feels a little hokey, but in the context of the time, it was kind of cool, kind of worked.
Yeah, I liked it. It was something fresh and new. Again, you got a new character. You know, Alexandra York was new. She was she did makeup for Larry King at CNN. She was around all the time. She did the makeup for the wrestling. So she was a fresh face, very, very attractive woman, had the perfect demeanor. The only thing that we saddled Terry with was hopefully she could learn. She knew more than we we perceived. She was green. She didn't know how to do certain things. And that's not a knock on Terry. It's just the fact that she had no experience in that role. And all of a sudden she's not put in developmental. She's not sent to OVW type deal. She's right on national television. So I thought for her training and her background and how she entered that role, she did extremely well. And I like the, computers are becoming more topical.
Yep.
And she had that little computer thing going. So I didn't have a problem with that presentation whatsoever.
It's almost kind of Michael Wall Street's gimmick, but when he slides out, Terrence Taylor, we make a minor change. Instead of Terry Taylor, he's Terrence Taylor, slides right in, gets the old slick back hair going, and Big Cat is introduced as his bodyguard. Of course, that's Curtis Hughes. And Taylor gets a win over Tom Zink at Wrestle War 91. And Tom Zink's another guy that I think WCW had really big hopes for, but for whatever reason, maybe never achieved at the way they would have hoped. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, Tom didn't connect with the audience. Tom had a little bit of that Terry Taylor mentality. I look good. I can wrestle. I can talk. So why aren't I on the top of the cards? And that's kind of how I felt about Tom and that deal. He was very skilled, but he was sometimes a little too defiant, too self-absorbed, shall we say. And, but talented, no doubt. Tom Zink had talent. He just had a less than desirable attitude for someone in his stead in life. You got to get along and to play along. And sometimes Tom didn't get along with the office, the things he said, questioning booking. And so that's just a matter of, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't say anything. I'm saying that if you're disgruntled or disappointed or, whatever, but Tom was just hard to please sometimes. And then Taylor became more of that the older he got, so I don't know, man. But I like the gimmick. We're repackaging Ricky Morton, and Tommy Rich was the other one I would say would be questionable, and then Terrence Taylor. So it was a bold move, but I thought it had some potential. Ricky Morton as a heel I thought it was great. Tommy Rich got a new lease on life with that gimmick. And then of course, there's Terry, and all kind of centered around Alexandria York. And she was, like I said, for the lack of experience that she had, she did a hell of a good job.
Eventually, the York Foundation would include Richard Morton and Thomas Rich. Of course, Terrence Taylor's still here. And in hindsight, it feels like, hey, this is three guys we don't really know what to do with. Let's change their names and slick their hairs back, and let's just see what we can do.
Yeah, pretty much. They were guys that we all knew could work.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have anything specific for them. So this was created to repackage those talents. And I had no issues with that concept whatsoever. I thought it made sense. You got to use your whole roster. Everybody's got a role. And if they're so meaningless that you can't figure a role out for them, or they just don't fit your game plan, then you need to let them move on and go find some place to work that they can be better at. So I didn't have a problem with that situation whatsoever. But it brings us to one of the more infamous matches of 1991 as well.
Yeah, the one of the worst matches of all time, Great American Bash 91, that terrible scaffold match in Baltimore. Terrence is going to be teaming with Steve Austin to take on P and News and Bobby Eaton. Of course, you've got three of the best four performers, maybe on the whole card, and we're going to put them in a scaffold match, so they can't really show what they can do worth a shit at all. But that was creative at times in 91, but it gets a little better. Halloween Havoc 91. Terrence finds himself in singles action against Bobby Eaton, and the readers of the Wrestling Observer called it match of the night. Probably no surprise though. If you let Terry Taylor and Bobby Eaton just do what they know how to do, you're going to get a good match.
Yeah. It's inevitably, no doubt about it. The one thing I'll say for all you folks that are listening that have run indie promotions and you want to have a scaffold match, my first piece of advice is don't.
Yep.
Because as you said, It limits your talents as to what they can do. And all the fans are waiting for is nothing unlike a NASCAR race. You're doing a succession of left turns, and you're just waiting for somebody to wreck, crash, and burn. And that's kind of how I look at NASCAR. And in all due respect, I enjoy NASCAR, but I enjoy the crashes the most. So the thing you should do is don't book a scalpel match, and find out of the guys that you're thinking about booking in this match if any of them are afraid of heights. Simple little thing. And you find out upon further review again, Connie, there were multiple people in that scalpel match that were not comfortable operating in high places.
Right.
So it was a failure from the time it came off the pencil to they got in the ring. It was horrible, and a very poor use of the talent and their skill set, without question.
November 10th, we would see a match that was taped on October 8th, where the York Foundation would defeat Big Josh, Dustin Rhodes, and Tom Zink to win the WCW 6-man tag team titles. Of course, these titles weren't long for this world. They're disbanded only about a month later. And the York Foundation winds up breaking up in 1992, but Terry's going to stay a heel and team with Greg Valentine to win the U.S. tag team titles for WCW. Maybe too many titles here, right? Feels like it.
Well, they get watered down.
Yeah.
It's hard to maintain a positive focus on multiple titles. You know, which one's the most important? So I think that I just think that the trend nowadays, well, let's just add more titles. That'll solve our issues. Well, no, it doesn't. And if you get too many, again, as I said, they become watered down. I'm very proud of the fact that in AEW we have three primary titles, one for the women, and then 2 singles titles for the men. And I think that's about right. If you're a female competitor, you know what your goal is. You know who's in that particular picture, and then of course the TNT title that Miro's holding is certainly one that is kind of reminiscent of a TV title, Conrad. At least that's my opinion. I'm not lessening it. Just that's kind of what it reminds me of. And then of course the big title is the one that Kenny Omega's holding for the AEW World Title. So it was just I think we're doing that right. But the adding titles to make talent happy is really bullshit.
Well, they dropped those bullshit belts to the Freebirds at Wrestle War 92. And the Freebirds are eventually going to drop those titles to Dick Slater and the Barbarian before finally Bill Watts just mercy kills the belts. But let's talk about the August 10th, 1992 edition of the Observer. Quote, Terry Taylor is definitely through and is trying to get back with the WWF or indie dates. He was offered a spot to come back under a hood as Mr. Wrestling 3, a protege of Mr. Wrestling 2, but it isn't going to materialize. Did you ever hear that creative? Mr. Wrestling 3?
Casually. It was never seriously considered. Again, it was a way they're reaching out, searching, looking for a new presentation for Terry Taylor. You still got the same guy that has the same skill set that can have great matches with anybody, but he's got to be repackaged again. And some can obviously go back and say, like me, if I wanted to stand on that box and shout to the stars, that damn Red Rooster killed him. I don't know that to be true. All I know is that because of Terry's ability to work, that he was constantly being repackaged or reevaluated so they can get him back in the game in a viable way. And that really that was never really accomplished, I don't think.
Taylor heads back to the WWF and you don't see him again until you wind up there in April of 93. Had he already transitioned by that point to being a broadcaster and sort of a backstage interviewer at that point, or was that after you're back, as far as you recall?
I think that plan was in works. You know, he had a great appearance. He looked good, well-spoken, had great product knowledge. So I think that was probably in his forte. Again, I always saw Terry as more of a heel
Right.
in those years. He would have been, I think he would have become an excellent manager if that route had been taken. But a wrestling heel is something he could do very well. But, you know, at that point, Terry was just trying, he had special needs sons. His wife was in poor health. I think his primary focus was just to maintain steady checks and not focus so much on his
aspirations as a wrestler.
Yeah, his role at that point in time. Take what they give you and make it really, really good. And I thought he could have been really, really good as a heel manager or a heel commentator.
I want to mention that best I can tell, his last match with the WWF in '93 was August 14th in Hartford, Connecticut. He was in the first match against Bob Backlund. But the match that he had right before that, August 6th, I think wound up being Brutus Beefcake's last match in the WWF when they were across the pond on a tour. But yeah, it does feel like we started to see a bit of a transition. Do you think, and listen, this has happened to a lot of guys over the years. Do you think he was just jaded with the professional wrestling business, what the politics of it and his spot in life? Or did he just sort of come to the realization, hey man, I got to be a provider here. I got to be a dad. I gotta change course.
I think the latter.
Yeah.
I think the latter, quite frankly. You have to come back to reality, the realness of the situation. So as a dad, as a husband, and his family had special needs. He lost his wife a few years later. He's still raising his sons.
Yeah.
And he's been a good dad. Of all the things about Terry Taylor that I would boil this down to is the fact that he's been a hell of a father, and it's not easy in his situation. So, so for me, Terry Taylor's always going to be perceived as a winner because he was a great father to grown men who had special needs. And he was patient enough to teach them, to love them, and to care for them. And I wish I could say that more about more wrestlers and how they treated their families and raised their kids, et cetera, but I'm not. But Terry Taylor was a champion when it came to being a dad, and that may have been the best title he ever has.
September of '93, we see him again in WCW. This time he's doing commentary with Tony Schiavone. But by the end of September, he's wrestling in in-ring competition again, having some matches even in October with Tom Zink and Ron Simmons. And so he's back in the ring again, just sort of back and forth. And if you read the Observer and you read the Torch in this era, it does feel like we're seeing a lot of Terry Taylor news. It feels like he figured out how to sort of back channel information and make sure he was written about well. I mean, it's easy to put it together in hindsight now when you look at that stuff in context. Did the quote unquote offices know that Taylor was in communication with the Torch and the Observer?
Don't know if they knew or not. They probably did. Everybody has a hard time keeping their mouth shut in this business. And it's not changed a damn bit. It's always the same. Your rumor and innuendo cliche is one that is still very applicable, unfortunately. But I think what was discovered along the way that Terry had a knack for creative. And he's, again, as I said, sometimes you just got to look for different roles for people if they have the skill set to do so. And I always thought that's what he had an affinity for creative. He'd been good on a if he could get along with everybody and not being as such where he's got the idea's got to be his idea or it's not a good idea. I thought he had an opportunity to be in a booking environment, creative environment. I still think he'd been a great wrestling heel manager, or a wrestling heel, just period. So, I don't know. I felt, but times kept changing and he kept changing, and he's almost Conrad hit every stop he could. What was there left to do? So here he comes back to WWE, or trying to get back to WWE all that time.
I wanted to mention too that he's only with the company here about a year before he's going to leave again, do a bunch of indie bookings. He does eventually, as we know, come back to WCW as both a road agent and part of the booking committee. And he's going to stay with WCW from 96 to 98 before ultimately he's going to quit, and he's going to come over and help Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara and rejoin the company. At that point, you're sort of running talent relations. Talk to me a little bit about how that deal came to be when he comes back to the WWF.
Well, we're just trying to find something that we knew he had a lot of skills, but what do we need right now?
Right.
What's our voids? What do we need right now? But it was clear to me, no matter how high hopes WWE and their creative trio there, with Bruce, Pat, and Vince, they weren't as high on him this go around as they were when they created the Red Rooster. It's just, he didn't seem like he had any he didn't have a lot of equity, which is unfortunate. So I didn't know what his role was going to be, but he was he's going to have to do something other than being a babyface wrestler. So I just thought at that stage of his career, he had other contributions he could make that were hard to fill. So
here's what will be written up in the Observer. Taylor was working without an existing contract, which made all of this possible. Taylor was one of those unfortunate types caught in the middle, having to make sense out of all the egos, vetoing everything, and then taking the heat because the shows didn't make any sense, and had at times been between Bischoff's whipping boy. It should help WWF as Russo, who grew up as a fan, but has virtually no pro wrestling background, which has both its pluses and minuses, and Ferrara, who didn't, are writing TV that is drawing ratings, but oftentimes the details of the storylines don't make sense and don't build to anything. So I guess, I hate the phrase, but you've heard it. WWF at the time needed a quote unquote wrestling person, right?
Yeah, I've heard that many times. They still need a wrestling person, but go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, if you think you've got these great writers, but for whatever reason, they don't have the wrestling experience, you need somebody who does have that experience about, okay, that's a good idea, but, and I think sometimes that has been missing in some eras of different head writers. I'm not throwing stones anywhere, just saying that still exists today, as you mentioned. But if you have a person like Terry Taylor who knows a thing or two about a thing or two, he could probably check all those boxes. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. It all comes down to product knowledge. Are you going to hire anybody in your mortgage company that has not one iota of common sense or acumen about selling mortgages? No.
No.
Product knowledge. You walk onto a car lot. These yahoos can tell you all about the radio and how to set this and how to set that. You got to have a master's degree nowadays to operate your car. I got shit on my Lexus that I still don't know what it means. I got buttons here, buttons there. I don't know what the hell. I was looking the other day if I could figure out how my seats were air conditioned. I figured out how to turn the heat on. I couldn't figure out how to turn the cool on. Stuff like that for us idiots. But I don't, Terry's just, there's just all kinds of things that he could have done. But again, he had to back her down a little bit. Don't be so free with your verbal contributions. You alienate too many people. And so all of a sudden, when you get involved into an alienation situation, you lose your focus, you lose your objectivity. And I think that bit him in the ass more than once.
I want to mention that he comes back when the WWF is really, really hot. And, well, wrestling politics being what they were, how was he received as far as you know? I mean, you're running talent relations. Were people bending your ear about Terry Taylor coming back in, or did everybody view it as a positive?
I don't know if everybody viewed him as a positive, but I didn't get a lot of pushback on that whatsoever. Guys would make their little snide remarks. Well, you know what you get with Terry Taylor, right, JR? Oh, yeah. I'll just say, yeah, sure I know. Then leave it alone.
Right.
They're looking to bury somebody that I'm not looking to bury. But there wasn't that much pushback on it. You know, we had other talents that came in that there was more pushback on. There's certainly more pushback on the NWO guys coming in, Kevin and Scott and Hulk, than Terry Taylor, for example. So, but I think most people just thought Terry at that point, because of all the stops he'd made, Conrad, it was much to do about nothing. He didn't have a lot of stroke. He had no stroke. So I don't think people were afraid of their position, that he might take their spot. I don't think that was the case whatsoever.
Let's mention that eventually Russo and Ferrara are going to leave for WCW in the dead of night, as it's written. We've of course talked about that a lot, but the rumor and innuendo is Terry Taylor is going to start doing a bigger part of the writing. And of course the WWF realizes, hey, we need to make sure what just happened with Russo and Ed doesn't happen again. So the Observer from October 25th, 1999 would read, Terry Taylor, who was head of the group in charge of writing WWF TV shows since Russo's departure, had, as of the weekend, refused to sign the non-compete clause, which spread rumors that he was WCW bound. He was at the WWF tapings in Columbus, Ohio, and was scheduled for a meeting with Vince McMahon on 10/20, where he was apparently looking for a deal which would give him more long-term security. Are you a part of these conversations?
Yeah.
What do you remember about him?
That he had no leverage.
Okay.
You're going to do our deal or no deal. But it got you back got your jersey back.
Yeah.
That's what he had a hard time understanding. Well, you know, you burnt some bridges. You're not doing your reputation any favors. So consequently, we'll give you a shot to get back in the game, but you got to crawl before you run, and you produce and do great works, then everything takes care of itself. He just didn't see it that simplistically. And that was always, just again, his head, he thought too much. He's too paranoid about certain things. And here's a crazy thing about this, Conrad. We all knew he had skills.
Right.
He's getting chance after chance after chance, trying to find a job description that fits his skill set. If you're a manager, this is discussed daily. We got a good guy here. We're not quite sure where we're going to put him or her, but we like this person. Let's see what we can work out. And Terry came to us in that era with no leverage, but we knew he had some skills that we could use if he was willing to accept that role. But there was seemingly, and I might be wrong, there's seemingly always something more. He was just concerned about this or concerned about that. And what you read there was, I think, it in a nutshell. He was looking for long-term security. And sometimes that's hard to find in WWE. I was lucky. I had 26 years there, but I didn't have 26 consecutively.
Right.
I had some sabbaticals and some, future endeavored and all that bullshit. But that's part of the life. You read about it all the time, in every walk of life, not just wrestling. So that was his issue there. I think that he was looking for long-term success and security to take care of his family.
Well, let's talk about it. November 8th, 1999. This is in the Observer. Terry Taylor did come into Connecticut to do some voiceover work on October 27th, but then was sent back home. Apparently he still refused to sign the non-compete clause. And until he signs, they apparently are playing hardball about using him. He wasn't until midweek to make a decision. At last word, WCW had not yet made him a bona fide offer, but indications were that he may get one. He's apparently telling people he's leaning towards staying with the WWF, although it was made clear to him that Vince McMahon is going to be head writer on the TV shows, a position he was trying to get. There may be a monkey wrench concerning a potential return to WCW, which is there was a complaint made to Human Resources against Taylor, which could get in the way of a rehiring. Did you know that when you had that meeting with him, that he had no leverage, that there was an HR issue over there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He sometimes just made stupid mistakes. And in today's world, it would be even more of a crisis.
Right.
Then it was just becoming fashionable. And, Terry was a flirt.
Got it.
And sometimes he would say things that were construed as extremely negative, Conrad, or very, very uncomfortable to some members of the opposite sex. So, but that was part of his issue. He had some HR issue. I think he had some HR issues in Atlanta. So,
and TNA and everywhere else.
Yeah. So that shit follows you around, man.
Yeah. November 15th, 1999. So the next week of the Observer, Terry Taylor was hired to work in booking. Ultimately, WCW was able to get the complaint at Human Resources against him from when he previously worked there taken care of, and opened the door to them making him a serious offer, which hadn't come until literally the day before he was forced into making the decision. Taylor felt that had he stayed with the WWF, he really wouldn't have any power. The only reason he left WCW in the first place was because he was Eric Bischoff's whipping boy, which is a moot point now, and because Bischoff blew up at him when rumors surfaced he was about to make a move to the WWF. In addition, Taylor hadn't moved from Atlanta, so working in WCW would mean much less travel, or at least not having to move. J.J. Dillon got a promotion of sorts and will be working more closely with Russo and Ferrara, so Taylor is getting some of his old duties, including being in charge of booking the house show events. In regards to the non-compete clause, McMahon wanted all the employees to sign, which Taylor never signed. According to lawyers that have contacted us regarding the situation, in almost all cases where those are challenged in court, the court strikes them down. So Taylor makes the move. Were you disappointed or shocked to hear that Taylor was leaving, or when he didn't just go ahead and sign that non-compete, did you kind of know this is how this winds up?
Yeah. Well, if you don't sign a non-compete, you're not going to be here.
Right.
So it's pretty simple. You sign and stay,
or you don't.
You don't sign and you go. That's what that was. Real simple. And that's a very base way of managing, but it was just the way it was. I don't know. I can't look. I like Terry. I still like Terry. I've known him forever, but it didn't break my heart that he didn't stay, because there's always something else to address to move the needle. And after a while, it gets tiresome. And you just said it there about he's the power thing. He didn't have power.
That's silly.
And that's where we are. A lot of wrestlers are getting to try to get into administration. Thank God I never was a wrestler. Because I would look stupid in tights, and I bruise easy. And I can't do any jobs. So there's that. But seriously, it's just enough's enough.
Right.
Take a doo-doo or get off the pot. Let's roll here, buddy. And he made it hard on himself. So he hooked back up with WCW. Quite frankly, as a friend of Terry Taylor's, I was glad to see that happen. You finally got a job. You got some benefits. You're an employee, as I understand it. So you hit the best deal you could get. And if WCW wants you to sign a no compete, by all means, sign the goddamn thing. I don't understand to me, it's illogical. So the wrestlers trying to be lawyers or managers or whatever, real managers. Not a great scenario in my view.
So he comes back. This guy has more lives than Jeff Jarrett. October of 2002, it makes the Observer. Terry Taylor's situation is this. Johnny Ace went to bat to give Taylor a tryout as an agent this past week. Taylor had a lot of heat from his previous tenure in the company, and it hadn't dissipated. No decision has been reached as to where things go from this point. Vince yelled at Taylor in San Diego for his part in laying out the Rikishi Chavo match for coming up with the idea of using the camera because Vince said they're trying to teach the wrestlers to use holds and work a body part. So he's still hired. I'm sure you were involved. You're running talent relations. What do you remember about Terry coming back?
I got tired of it, Conrad. I'm tired of talking about it right now, to be honest with you.
Sure.
It's just got to be too high maintenance. So now I'm never going to be his enemy. I didn't have time to make enemies with people on our team. But you know, at certain point in time, you know, come on, man. You know, you got to, you know, let's make this thing work or not. Maybe the wrestling business is not for you. Maybe it's changed so much that you can't deal with the changes. But in any event, I thought when he went to WCW that would have worked, and it should have worked. Whatever. I don't. Eric would know more about that than I. But you know, he was there. It could have been an asset if he had, but he had to have proper management. Terry's issue is going to be this: he had poor communication skills, saying the wrong things to the wrong people at the wrong time. Really basic common sense approach. And that's the issue. That's why I said earlier on this broadcast that he was his own worst enemy. What came out of his mouth hurt him more than anything he could have done in the ring. And he didn't quite get that.
He made it until July of 03, and then he was released. The Observer would say Terry Taylor's departure apparently was not a financial cutback issue. It was a discipline deal, but not believed to have much, if anything, to do with him offering divergent opinions. Reports are he's waiting to see if he's going to be offered a severance package before taking a job with TNA, which would nix such a package. There is no official word if he's being offered a job in TNA, but he's got more friends in the company right now. Of course, Scott D'Amore was something of a protege of his, and he's out once again. He winds up being picked up by TNA, just as Meltzer had speculated. And he was there really from any longest stretch of his career anywhere, from 03 until 2011. And at WrestleMania 28, you called the Triple H Undertaker match. It was dubbed the end of an era match. And it was reported at the Observer that Terry Taylor was at that show and in heavy negotiations to come back and be a fixture and developmental. Of course, that's pre NXT, but they saw him in that role and it worked out. And Terry, I believe, is still helping folks down at NXT to this day. What do you think his legacy is going to be in professional wrestling when it's all said and done?
Highly touted, high maintenance, highly skilled. Never quite, he was later in life until he found out what he was really, really good at. And Terry's been a really good instructor, coach down in NXT. And so, but I go back to what I said earlier. In my opinion, and this is a grandpa and a father talking, his greatest achievement is how he's raised his sons. Because it's a job that, you know, neither of us with our children and my grandchildren have to deal with what he has to deal with on a daily basis. It's got to be challenging and daunting and tough, emotionally tough. So to me, he was always, he's a hell of a wrestler. He's a great coach. But I think his greatest accolade to Conrad, seriously, is the fact that he's been a great father to two special needs sons and a job that many of us would cringe at, knowing this is what we have to do. We have to take care of these two boys, and he's done that. So all the other negative stuff I erase. He couldn't decide what he wanted to do. He had high expectations. He had bad communication skills. He's got to chill at the right time, and all those things. To me, all that is put on the erase board, like that little big-breasted girl from AT&T does in her commercials. You know what I'm talking about?
Nope, but I guess I need to look that up.
Look it up. Look at her name, it's AT&T Lily or something. And they keep her, no, they keep her bundled down because she's very buxom.
Oh, yeah.
And
Milana, that's his name. That's her name.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yep.
I wish she lived in Jacksonville. Or Norman.
Could probably be arranged.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Who? What?
Let's jump into some fan questions here.
I love the fan questions.
Uso wants to know, Jim, who had more backstage heat, Terry Taylor or Paul Heyman?
Good question. Paul Heyman, he took it to the next level.
He's an overachiever, that Paul Heyman.
Yeah. Well, Paul Heyman had the ability to say caustic things, but in a context that he could make an argument that I didn't mean it personally type deal. Heyman by far.
Ted the Hillbilly Hill says, we knew Terry had backstage heat, but was there a talent Terry really had heat with and just didn't like? Did somebody stand out? Like, man, those
not really. Nobody stood out that I could think of. I'm sure there are some that didn't agree with him. But no specific individual stands out that would have been sideways with Taylor.
Instagram or wrestling historian wants to know, in your opinion, Jim, why didn't Terry Taylor become a big star?
I think we've explained that. His own self, his own way of thinking, the way he approached things, the way he communicated. It had nothing to do. Sorry, Conrad. It had nothing to do with his inability to work bell to bell. Get rid of that. It's all Terry brought on these issues largely himself by opening his mouth when it should have been shut. And at the end of the day, that's kind of where I see his legacy. Very talented, but a very poor communicator in that era. Obviously, he's communicating better now because he's had his job in NXT for quite some time. I've heard talent say how much he's helped them. And I think he's finally found his calling.
Kurt Zamora wants to know, Jim, in your opinion, is Terry Taylor the epitome of being your own worst enemy?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Being too smart for your own britches.
Well, I wish we weren't ending on a down question, but Tony Flowers says, is Terry is famous for his apparent political nature. Do you believe Terry came to wrestling that way, or do you think wrestling made him that way over time?
I think probably over time and the experiences that Terry had, that's how he was conditioned. Then it became, he fell into a lot of his peers. Terry Taylor's not the only guy that has these traits.
Right.
Good Lord. More of the guys have these traits than don't. So I think he probably acquired those skills. You want to say that loosely, over time. And he also saw what role politics played in pro wrestling, especially in that era. And it's still playing today to varying degrees of reality, because it hasn't gone away. It's just politics are a big part of pro wrestling. They always have been. They were since the first day I walked into the dressing room, the first time in 1974. It was that way. And it hasn't changed a damn bit.
Well, this show is changing. Next week, we're going to be talking about something a little more modern, but it's still 25 years old. We're talking SummerSlam 1996. And the main event, it's Shawn Michaels and Vader. And of course, famously, it was supposed to be a 3-match series on pay-per-view, but this match changed all that. We'll talk about that next week, as well as Mankind versus The Undertaker, Jerry Lawler versus Jake Roberts in, well, a spectacle of a match. Goldust is working with Mark Miro. Psycho Sid is in there with the British Bulldogs. We've got a 4-way elimination tag for the WWF tag titles with the Smoking Guns, the New Rockers. We'll talk about that. The Godwins, and of course the Body Donnas. And then Owen Hart and Savio Vega open the pay-per-view, but the free for all, even that was interesting. Stone Cold Steve Austin is going to be facing Yokozuna, and they do something with the ring that we're going to talk about. It's SummerSlam 1996. The NWO's heating up. Things are getting hot on the other channel, and you can just feel there's competition, and wrestling is building and booming again. And we hope that we're sort of living that again now in 2021, Jim. Tomorrow night, Rampage, the very first one, live from Pittsburgh. I'm going to be watching, man. I can't wait to see what you guys do.
It's going to be on TNT. Where the Time Warner folks are flexing their muscles and their support of our brand. You know, we're always going to be in some role on TNT. These specials, which I perceive to be kind of like a Clash of the Champions type thing.
Yeah. Before
we move full time over to TBS for Dynamite, and then eventually for Rampage as well. So, yeah, it's the start of a new era. Will we have the same success and the same momentum building for our brand on Rampage as we've had on Dynamite? And the Dynamite ratings have been phenomenal. Anytime you're the #1 show on cable on your night, I don't give a shit what your product is. It's a big deal. So we're growing well, and it's going to be fun. So hope everybody gives it a chance. It tunes in. You know, here's the irony of this. As you and I are recording this, Conrad, I don't have a clue who's on the broadcast team. I've heard a lot of rumor and a lot of speculation. I don't think it's me in any stretch of the imagination. I think others should be able to build their own brand on that show. But it's going to be, they're not going to be a throwaway show. This is not going to be, what was that show that WWE did? Or excuse me, WCW did Nitro and
Thunder.
It ain't going to be Thunder.
Yeah.
In all due respect to the Thunderites of the world.
Yeah, Thunder was like a side, right? So if Nitro was the steak, Thunder was the asparagus. But I understand that Rampage, it's going to be something else entirely. Now, as a reminder, there's now 3 hours of wrestling on Friday. You'll have 2 hours of WWE SmackDown on Fox. As soon as that's over, click over to TNT. AEW's live tomorrow night, man. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun continuing our adventure. This new brand, this rollout, this startup operation, and how we're growing has been nothing short of extraordinary. We appreciate everybody at least giving us a chance to evaluate our product. It's not a wrestling award. The war is us against our own selves getting better, and our talents getting better. So it's going to be good. So it should be fun, man. I'm excited about the growth of our company, and hopefully Rampage is going to fit right in there really, really well. And I think the curiosity factor for Rampage it's been heightened. So, because there's a lot of speculation who's going to appear on that show, and that could be really, really big news.
I want to mention too, we've got a very special event coming up later this month over at adfreeshows.com. It's going to be a Ask JR. It's happening live, and we're going to be doing something bonus, something extra from Grilling JR every single month over at adfreeshows.com. And of course, we've got your old radio show from Atlanta, the old studio sessions. Talk about a time capsule. You get to hear those old shows in long form in the context of which they aired. So not just snippets, but the whole doggone show. Great stuff, man. I'm looking forward to it every week at adfreeshows.com.
Drops on Fridays, and it's building an audience. So that's good. I'm glad you've made that investment with Dennis Brent. And it is very unique. It was very unique for its time, before the days of Busted Open even.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where, Busted Open has the same basic format. They take calls, they have special guests, and they do a hell of a job, Dave LaGreca and his team. So I'm a very loyal listener of that show. If I'm in near radio, I'm listening when it's on the air. So I think it was ahead of its time. And so you'll see that if you listen to one episode on the Ad Free Network, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I know somebody was talking very high praise of, we had some guys on the other day, Teddy Long and maybe Scott Steiner, but it's a who's who. All the talents in that era, Conrad, wanted to be on that show because they felt it helped build their brand and get their word out and make them a bigger star when they were a guest on that show. Because I gave them free reign. They could talk about whatever they wanted to, and I'd always have a few questions in my pocket to throw at them. But they're usually storyline oriented. But there are also other stuff too that was on there. So hopefully folks will check that out. Just nothing else out of curiosity. Studio sessions is a fun listen.
Check it out, adfreeshows.com. Greatly appreciate all you guys' support. He is at JR's BBQ. I am at Hey, it's Conrad. And we'll see you next week right here on a very special episode of Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross.
And we love our seasoning at jrsbbq.com. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day.